Okay, so it seems that we are getting stabilized in terms of participants, so we can slowly begin. Bilina, can we start? We started recording. So welcome everyone to Agile Coffee, uh, uh, Agile Coffee 29 online already. With us today is Tomislav Longinovic, and we will talk about resilience today. This meeting will be recorded, so if you're not okay with showing us your face, you can switch off the camera. If you like, keep the camera on. It's always more pleasant to see who are we talking to. Tomislav will talk for maybe 20, 25 minutes. There is no presentation, so it's just talk, and then we will go into dialogue. So you're invited to post questions to the chat as we go, and we will touch on them and discuss. I will join in also as on multiple things. I'm very interested in seeing what Tomislav has to say. So with that, let me introduce. So Tomislav Longinovic is an emeritus professor of Slavic and comparative literature at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In his rich career of a professor and a writer, he changed the focus of his interest several times. He started his university studies with a degree in clinical psychology at the University of Belgrade and continued with an MFA in creative writing from the Iowa Writers Workshop at the University of Iowa, where he also specialized in video and performance art. He has published over 50 scientific papers and dozens of books, which have been translated into many languages, including French, Spanish, Turkish, and Polish. Alongside his research and creative writing, he has continued with his calling as a psychonaut through the creation of a unique RNDA method of body-centered personality change. So we have a lot of things here. Somebody very experienced, and I'm very excited to hear, especially the part around pulling in some of the Eastern and Western ways of thinking and doing stuff together and jumbling down and making something unique out of it. So welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you so much, and hello, Agile Humans and Miloš and everybody else, and thank you, Yasmina, and the whole team for invited me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this process, and to hopefully contribute to clearing some of these questions around well-being and resilience, which is going to be the topic of our talk, and then later discussion in a workshop-like style, which is what I really prefer. So let me begin, and I'm going to divide my little talk into three parts. The first part is going to talk a bit about the definition and the current situation in which we find ourselves in this pandemic, and especially regarding these two variables, the well-being and resilience. Then I'll speak about some research done in Britain about the types of human responses according to these two variables of well-being and resilience. And then in the end, I'm going to offer some practical advice and solutions in terms of how to increase well-being and resilience and how to cope with adverse situations in our lives. And as Miloš said in the introduction, I have started my academic career with a degree in clinical psychology, and now at this kind of third part of my life, I'm also returning slowly to it by creating this new method of psychological training called RADA, or RADA, which stands for Radical and Deconstructive Action. And I will perhaps talk a little bit about it also in the questions and in the discussion part. So let us start first with the definition of well-being by the World Health Organization that defines it as a state of mind in which an individual is able to realize his or her own abilities, cope with the normal stress of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Basically, this breaks down into two parts. So on the one hand, the individual should be feeling good about themselves, their community, and those that are close to them. And also the person should be functioning well in the society, on their jobs, or in their family. So this would be the kind of definition of well-being. As far as resilience goes, we can define it as the ability to cope with life's challenges and adapt to adverse situations that we find ourselves with. Not to fall apart when things get tough, but to be able to, like a cat, catch ourselves on all four legs when we are thrown into the bad parts of our lives. And of course, we all face, since the last year and a half, a situation that's kind of unprecedented in our lifetime, a situation similar kind of to the medieval plagues, which is the problem of the current pandemic and the types of situations that it causes in our psychological lives. It is especially hard for younger generations, and I have actually recently read about some research that says that over 50% of people between the age of 18 and 29 suffer from some psychological disorder because of these cases of extreme social isolation caused by the pandemic. And so this is really worrying, and you always have people now trying to find different kinds of solutions to how to increase both resilience and well-being in the overall populations. So, being faced with this kind of situation in the pandemic and being anxious and even depressed are really expected responses to this new and unpredictable life challenge, since they reflect the very unfavorable conditions that we are currently living in. And they are oftentimes called the new normal, but which I like to call ironically the new abnormal, because actually there is nothing normal about the situation that we find ourselves in, quite the opposite. Some of the aspects of this new abnormal you all share, but I will just kind of list them here. First, on the economic front, possibility of a job loss due to the contracting economies, a fear of personal bankruptcy because there is no income, inability to get proper medical attention and treatment because everything is now, given over to the treatment of COVID-19 patients. Then overwhelming fear for our parents, our siblings, and children getting infected, as well as ourselves getting infected. A sense of overall helplessness to cope with the situation because it appears as this kind of invisible agent that is actually causing us to feel this basic existential insecurity. Then fear of closed borders and restricted movement. We feel somehow trapped in our local communities. Those of us especially who are used to international travel, find ourselves in a very new situation right now. Then recently, since the introductions of the new vaccine to treat the virus, we also have a lot of fear and anxiety related to the safety of the entire vaccination process. And although the states are always doing their best to ensure us and assure us that everything is going to be fine, of course, personally, people are not so convinced. So that also causes anxieties. And most of all, that is all these fears can be summed up as the fear of the unknown, which is at the root of most of these other particular fears. And this is also something that defines anxiety as the unspecified, fear or the fearful feeling, that we get, and oftentimes we don't know why, but we have all the physical symptoms of the fear, which is sweaty palms, trembling, feeling of being cornered, and so on. So not knowing what to expect in this type of situation is the main source of this particular anxiety, since usually humans are in large numbers the creatures of habit, and they thrive in predictable environments. So throwing something unpredictable their way is definitely there to cause the anxious response. And because of this impossibility to know and predict the outcomes of our jobs and our lives, many mental health workers have termed the last years of the 20th century and the first 2 decades of the 21st century the age of anxiety. Now, we are on the threshold of the 3rd decade of the 21st century, and we are also forced to recognize and accept these new abnormal realities, however scary they may be, since there is little we can achieve by actually denying them. We just, first step would be just actually acknowledging that they are there. It's very likely that the denial will only increase our anxiety and make us more prone to depleting our overall mood and stamina, which largely define our well-being and resilience. Secondly, we also need to realize that although we may not be able to control these new risky situations in real life, we can control our responses to them. So making that distinction, how we respond to the situation, however unfavorable it is, and the bad situation itself is also crucial. Although accepting our everyday reality as a set of random and unpredictable events is very difficult to grasp, since our mind constantly tries to make sense out of everything that comes our way and see some greater plan behind it, both favorable or unfavorable. It is always good to remind ourselves that we can try to master our reactions to those unpredictable events. And this is certain to decrease the level of anxiety we face under the new conditions of the pandemic and increase both our personal resilience and our overall well-being in coping with this healthcare crisis. And towards the end of the presentation, I will talk about these responses and what we can actually do. Now, in the middle part that we are coming upon, I will speak about some research data on well-being and resilience. And this was done in Britain. So, these results may also be culturally biased. They may not apply uniformly across the population, but they are actually providing some of the major trends in thinking through these psychological categories, the well-being and resilience. So the researchers have, and I will just go briefly over the kind of results and conclusions. I will not talk about the experimental design or the methodology, but just actually what they came up in their conclusions. These psychologists came up with 4 types of human responses identified in correlating the the well-being and resilience variables. And these 4 types are, first of all, happily weathering the storm, whatever it may be. Individuals with high well-being and high resilience, both variables are tested as high. And then on the other opposite end of that, humans who are barely coping and are unhappy. And those would be individuals with low well-being and low resilience. And then we have the 2 in-between types, those who are satisfied but feel vulnerable. And those will be individuals with high well-being but with low resilience. And finally, the 4th type, people who are weathering the storm but are unhappy. So these would be individuals with high resilience but with low well-being. I'll just say a few things about each one of these types and some of the predictors for what came about in the research as to identify them as such. For the first type, those who are happily weathering the storm, those people who have high well-being and high resilience, the stronger predictor of high well-being and high resilience is basically not being unemployed. It's kind of interesting how they put it. It's not having a job, but not being unemployed is number 1. So all those of you who are at this meeting, I suppose you're part of some organization. So you are in a good position to be in this category. Also, having children increases chances of being in this group and was the second most strongly associated factor and predictor of in this group that's happily weathering any storm. Also, higher levels of education were associated with being in this group. And interestingly, and this is kind of specific to Britain, not speaking English as a first language was significantly associated with this category, possibly indicated the higher well-being and resilience among immigrant groups. So those who are not part of the mainstream culture, and therefore I'll have actually endured a lot of hardship, by employing the resilient, tactics in surviving. The second group, the one that's on the extreme end, is the one of those people who are barely coping and are unhappy. So those who have low well-being and low resilience. So people with both low well-being and low resilience were most strongly predicted to be unemployed, to have lower levels of education. They are very less likely to have children, and were more likely to be female, which is also very interesting that we have now this kind of gender component involved that showed up in the research results. And then third group, those who are now in the mixed group of people who are satisfied but vulnerable. They have high well-being but low resilience. And there are some similarities between this group and those, of course, that have the high well-being and high resilience. For instance, not being unemployed was the strongest predictor of being satisfied, but not resilient. Having children and high levels of education also increase the chance of having higher satisfaction, but low resilience. Individuals also who are not separated or divorced, or those that are married, single parents or widowed, are also more prevalent in this particular group. And finally, the fourth group, those people who are weathering the storm and are unhappy, so they have low well-being but high resilience. The strongest predictor is being dissatisfied but tough was actually not having children in this group. So lower levels of education are also common in this group, and it was more likely to be male, this particular group. Being unemployed increased the chances of being in this group also, as also did being single, divorced, or separated. And speaking English as a first language and identifying yourself as British, in this particular case of the British culture. So this is, quite interesting, and I think this will help us maybe just to kind of think through in an abstract way about the problem of well-being and resilience we're all facing today. You can kind of see what are the social and psychological factors that are involved from this particular research. And now in the last part of what I have to say today is basically kind of some of these useful practices that we can adopt in order to increase both of these two variables, the well-being and resilience. So on the level of everyday life and behavior, first we can try and limit our exposure to the media frenzy surrounding the pandemic. Most psychologists suggest that we need to look at the news about not more than once a day, noting the trends in the situation, noting the kind of just the informative part of it, and not get hooked on following the news day in and day out. That can contribute to the frenzy and to the feeling of anxiety and even lead to depression. This will likely keep our anxiety from getting out of control. And since the news actually reporting is structured in such a way as to raise the level of our concern beyond the normal level. So, the news and media houses are definitely participating quite successfully in stirring up the hysteria around the pandemic as well. Also, the quality of information is very important. And, this is something that is becoming more and more, let's say, symptomatic in the age that we live in, which is the age of so-called fake news, trying to stick to the news resources that have been proven and reliable, which is becoming increasingly difficult, since the sensationalist news and conspiracy theories now abound at the moment and can only increase uncertainty and anxiety in these conditions of the current crisis. Keeping the routines during our daily lives has proven to be soothing in the current situation, since it brings a sense of increased control over the segments of our experience that we are currently immersed in. This is especially true for the quarantine situations, since spending time without a structured sense of life can increase the level of anxiety and depression. For example, when people get quarantined, are in lockdowns and so on, if they don't like get out of bed and just procrastinate all day, it is very likely that they will soon become anxious and very depressed. These routines should be based on the principles of self-care, and since helping ourselves first will make us more capable of helping others when they need it as well. So in order to increase our resilience. And so the psychologists have come up with a kind of useful slogan or acronym that was coined by the mental health professionals and especially those who are coping with responses to trauma-inducing situations. And that acronym is HALT, H-A-L-T, or stop, or cease. This is a useful acronym to remember when we get caught up in the seemingly unresolvable psychological situations like the pandemic crisis. And I will go through each one of the 4 letters and talk a little bit more, about them. So HALT and a number H, letter H, which is something that we all can relate to. It stands for hungry. Your mood will be negatively affected if you are coping with hunger you did not realize is there. Always, when you get caught up in your work, take time to eat a light, healthy meal that will nourish your body. This is certain to help you improve your mood, as well as prevent a stress response from developing. And people all get caught up in their daily tasks and duties, caring for others and caring for their jobs, that they oftentimes forget to take care of themselves and this kind of basic, food cravings that they may have. So the second letter is A, which stands for angry. You may be feeling justified in your anger caused by the situations and persons that have caused it, but it is most likely that your anger will hurt you the most and provoke a variety of stress-related responses. It is best to take a few deep breaths, trying to mentally distance yourself from the situations and persons that have caused it. It is, of course, easier said than done, but there are elaborate techniques derived from meditation and prayer for alleviating anger, but it is not possible to dwell on them in detail during this presentation, but maybe during the discussion we can talk about some of those. L, of course, stands for lonely, and this has been one of the greatest problems during this pandemic. Loneliness is one of the hardest obstacles to overcome because we are invited to distance socially, and the fabric of our social lives have been severely disrupted by the new administrative measures which restrict movement in order to stop the spread of the virus. Humans are gregarious beings, and research has shown that loneliness, besides its obvious negative psychological impact, carries the risk of lowering our natural immunity as well. It is therefore imperative to try and use social media and other digital platforms, but positively, not getting into fights, but setting regular appointments with friends and family who make us feel better under the conditions of physical isolation. And finally, T, the last letter in this acronym, stands for tired. Although regular job routines have been disrupted by the pandemic regime, we may feel tired both physically and mentally for a variety of reasons. It is therefore very important to recognize fatigue and rest as soon as we are able to. So taking a 15 to 20-minute power nap during the day will do miracles in restoring our sense of well-being and keep the anxiety and depression at bay. Disconnect from all electronic devices during the rest period, darken the room you're in, and take a few deep breaths before taking a short nap. It is usually enough to just go under our normal awareness for just a few minutes to feel the full effect of such rest. And finally, I will end with motivation for everyday life from the kind of Buddhist perspective or the Buddhist way of being. And here on the wall behind me, there, you can see the tanka that my teacher Lobsang Namgyal gave me. I spent about 7 years meditating with him when I lived in the United States. And basically, this is the meditation that Buddhists do every day. And of course, we are not monks, but we can adopt some of their techniques and practices, especially in these difficult situations. So it goes like this: since death is certain, but the time of our death is uncertain, what is the most important thing? This is something that we should all think about it every day upon waking. You know you will die, but you really don't know how long you have to wake up from the cocoon of your habitual patterns. You don't know how much time you have left to fulfill the potential of your precious human birth. Given this, what is the most important thing? Every day of your life, every morning of your life, you could ask yourself, as I go into this day, what is the most important thing? What is the best use of this day? At my age, it's kind of scary when I go to bed at night and look back at the day, and it seems like it passed in the snap of a finger. That was a whole day. What did I do with it? Did I move any closer to being a more compassionate, loving, and caring, to being fully awake? Is my mind more open? What did I actually do? I feel how little time there is and how important it is how we spend our time. What is the best use of each day of our lives? In one very short day, each one of us can become more sane, more compassionate, more tender, more in touch with the dream-like quality of reality. Or we could bury all these qualities more deeply and get more in touch with the solid mind, retreating more into our own cocoons. The choice is ours. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tomislav. Now I open up for discussion. So either raise your hands or you can do post questions to chat. And I would also like to maybe build on your last thing, Tomislav, around. So I have a book next to me, which is Tibetan Book of Life and Death from Sogyal Rinpoche. I was very amazed. It very helped me through my difficult time when my father was dying from terminal illness. And this, the exact same philosophy around when you are faced with terminal illness, you see that like the time is limited. I can worry about it, I can cry about it, I can go into my cocoon, or I can use this time that it's limited, and then you switch your mind into that. So I think that's really, really powerful message for all of us to reflect. And also Agile Humans, we talk about retrospectives, we talk about maximizing the value. So here's how you are your best product owner and your Scrum Master. So reflect on your day, see, are you getting the maximum of your day, even in the given situations, right? And as you said, it's the age of anxiety, and Agile was built for such an age. So I think that definitely in the Agile culture, we have more of developing these skills. And to that, I wanted to ask you maybe like with this question to start, when we talked about resilience and we talked about well-being, also in sense of techniques, right? I have a feeling in Agile coaching, I'm an Agile coach, but also in Agile, we are starting to develop that as a competency. So it's also not just a life skill, but a professional skill. What's your take on that?
It is becoming, I think, more and more necessary, definitely, to become a professional skill, because I think the time in which, the large corporate organizations were very moribund, and, they couldn't really, I believe, function or perform their function without being aware of what is really going on. But people were just like there at their desks passing time. I think that age has definitely passed in kind of corporate culture and in the management circles, and people are because of the rapid changes in the economy, always forced to make rapid decisions to adjust to new situations. So I think you're definitely right. That this is something that is also necessary in the world of business and management as well.
And to that, we have our first question from Ivana. Would you like to speak your question so I don't read and we have a dialogue here?
Yeah, I'm hello. Yeah, thank you for
Hi.
this. I really appreciate this halt. Since I'm in Germany, it sounds really
Yeah.
metaphorical. Okay, yeah, but I'm wondering, there are, how can we? You said we have to acknowledge first that we are in pain or have some sort of lack of resilience towards the things that are occupying us around us in this corona time. So I'm wondering, how can people, when they're constantly dived into their work and have no time even to eat, as you say, so how can you sort of help them acknowledge that they are not actually in the state of being sane and safe? How would I advise someone to pay attention to these signs?
Well, it's if people tell you that they have like shortnesses of breath, if they have knots in their stomach, or if they have physical symptoms, that will be like the first sign. If they cannot sleep at night, if there is like a lot of insomnia and a lot of actually manifested fear, I would, that would be like the first sign, the first symptom. And then perhaps advise them to go with one of those 4 things, or even further, maybe go into some very simple breathing exercise and meditation techniques to calm down the body before the fully blown stress response develops. This would be kind of my advice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can also think of 2 things, especially from like the Scrum Master Agile coach perspective, is that you can always share your perception. So it looks like you are maybe more exhausted than before. Am I imagining this? What's going on? Because a lot of times when people go into this anxiety and fear, they're not really aware. So just giving them the information that something's odd can kind of like make them more aware. So it gives them the space to pause and really reevaluate what's going on. And then the other thing that I saw was, and I used to actively do this when I was in the office, was modeling breathing, modeling meditation, modeling yoga, modeling just saying, I'm so overwhelmed now. I need to prepare this meeting, but I first need like 10 minutes off. And you just say that and you go somewhere and then you come back fresh. And people are smart. When they see that, they will say, oh, well, this actually makes sense. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can try this. Maybe I can teach and learn how to do this. So I think also, if you are in a leader position, that's something that you need to do. And it's not something that we learned in school or in management trainings, I would say. So it is a new thing, especially, and in some cultures it's not. In some cultures, I think it's more developed, in some cultures less. So it's also, we talked about the Britain and then the Balkans, and I also have a lot of comparison with the US, which is really different in how are they resilient or not.
Mm-hmm. I think that's Miloš, that's excellent advice. I mean, modeling is probably a number one way of influencing others, because you can talk to them on ages, they may not hear because of their particular psychological makeup, or the whole set of resistances that they may have built up inside. They may not even like literally hear you, but if they see you do it, it's an entirely like a different situation. And if you model it for them, it is of course going to be a much more efficient way of helping and influencing them. And in terms of asking them, what's up with you and so on, of course that requires like a lot of tactfulness, so it does not appear like that you are calling them out, or that that they may get the impression that you are telling them they're not doing their job well, or so on and so forth. So I mean, of course, that requires like a lot of sensitivity in how we say that.
Yeah, thank you for that. It does require skill, right? And we have Michelle. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. So I'm in the US, and I completely agree with your last statement. To come up to somebody and say, oh man, you look rough. You doing okay? That can be really scary, because if somebody's doing all they can, that can come across really like, oh man. But I did want to jump onto something kind of a tact that I do for my teams. I schedule, let's say, a 30-minute or an hour meeting. But I try to always let them loose 5 to 10 minutes prior, and say, I'm giving you 10 minutes back on your calendar. This is for you. Go use this for you. And they're blocked off. No one else can get to them from a scheduling perspective. And then it gives them the ability to go just take a walk around the house, if that's what it is. But and go grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is. And that seems to be, well, it's very well received, because we all need those minutes. And when you're going from meeting to meeting, I coach a whole bunch of different teams. And so I am, and now in the world of COVID and having all of your meetings right here, you can get yourself into big trouble with, you hang up from one at 29 minutes after the hour, and you're starting into the next one at 30 minutes after. And you just go, and you're switching the hats, because it's a whole different group of people. And sometimes it's the same team, but sometimes they're completely unrelated, which are how most of mine are. And that can be a little chaotic. And so I do it for me, but I do it for them as well. And I specifically say, go take a 5 minutes, for yourself. Just get your brain settled back down again. So that's one of my, I'll say, coping skills that I lead with.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I think that's a great, way of showing also generosity, from your side, that people feel appreciated, that they have like a time to actually like stop everything that they're doing and just like pause, and then hopefully that will give them some rest, and that they can come back. And in terms of those endless Zoom meetings, I have something to say, but it's in Serbian. I have made up like a proverb, and I don't know if it translates well, because it rhymes. Od Zuma do Zuma dok ne siđeš suma. So I think the people will understand. It's very funny in Serbian. It's like from Zoom to Zoom until you lose your mind. Basically, that's the literal translation.
And I'm so happy you shared this, because it's a new skill to develop, to not go from Zoom to Zoom, or to book 10 minutes before. What I do is I book pauses in my calendar. And just today I had a conversation with a Scrum Master, and she was like, but I can't even get time for lunch. And if you don't have time for lunch and you're coaching a team, they're not going to have any either, because you need to, as Tom said, first take care of yourself. And especially if you're in leadership position, first take care of yourself, and then you'll be able to help your team. And sometimes that's just, I block half an hour for lunch, and no, you can't get me on Zoom, and I'm going to tell you. Right. So it's also sometimes around being assertive and establishing and modeling that. Like, no, it's not actually okay to not have a pause. We should actively do something about it. Yeah.
My lunch block says block for lunch. Yes, that means you.
Awesome, love it.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have another question from Georgia. This one is also, I would say, a rather common one, because again, we don't have the skill of separating the work from our profession, and I think mothers are especially hit during COVID. The working mothers, right, especially with toddlers. I can tell you, I've seen a head of product with a boy piggybacking and saying "Giddy up, mommy." So in the middle of the meeting. So it's definitely a new skill. So can we hear from Georgia about your question related to this subject?
Hello, everyone. My main problem that I'm concerned with is exactly what I wrote here. I have noticed in the past a few months, I think 5 or 6, as I started working from home, that as months pass by, I've been becoming less productive and less motivated. It was especially difficult before the new year, because I have seen myself work until I'm not kidding, 1 a.m. the whole day and until 1 a.m. because I always felt like just one more thing, I need to finish this, because it was always, how do I say, on the top of my head that I need to work on it. And the line was blurred significantly between the working hours and my time at home and my time to rest. This is talking from experience. I've tried to cope with that from the new year onwards, with just moving on from the computer at 4 p.m. when the work's ended. But I have noticed that my motivation and productivity is becoming, even now when I started to make a little bit of difference between work and home, I'm starting to be even less productive and less motivated to get up in the morning. But also, even though I walk away from the computer, I still continue to think about all the possibilities, all the possible solutions to the problems that I have at work. So that brings me a lot of tiredness, anxiety, and when talking about this issue with my team, they, for the colleagues that are also in the similar situation that are working from home, they say about the similar thing that is happening to them. So I was wondering if there is any advice as to make the situation better in the meantime.
I mean, this is really like a tough question, because you are actually giving all the examples that I mentioned in the very beginning on the first part of the presentation of how actually this situation is contributing to depleting our human energy, our resources, and contributes to the loss of motivation, basically.
Yes.
Try those kind of like for halt things, if at all possible. But the situation with small children that Miloš mentioned, even complicates this more, because they cannot be talked into. You tell them, okay, you have to be quiet, but of course they're not going to be quiet. They're going to run around, because they're little. They need to be outside. They need to run, and so on and so forth. So with the kids, usually is one of the tricks that the child psychologist has been doing is actually like facing them and telling them, when they are like whining or screaming, or telling them, I know I hear you, I know what you're saying. Yes, it is what it is. Just like simply recognizing that something is going on with them, rather than telling them, be like this, be like that, don't do this, don't do that, which of course they're always going to be resistant to. I'm saying this because Miloš mentioned small children in the beginning, and this is of course the smallest problem, because they actually need us the most, when they're that small, and you don't want to like waste part of them being small and your own parenthood to the job. But then on the other hand, you have to have a job to feed them, so it's like really being caught between the rock and the hard place. So basically, switching off your mind at night, you know, and not thinking about the solutions to the problems, you know, is like the key. And doing some sort of mindfulness practice that we mentioned, a kind of meditation in which you try to learn how to block out everything and just like breathe and be in your body. Doing some sort of set of physical exercises as well that will take, you know, the mind off, and taking at least like half an hour if you can in the day where you like share care of the kids and you stop thinking about everything and just devote them to yourself, you know, taking a hot bath or something like this, where you just switch off your mind, you know, is going to be key, because you need those kind of mental islands in order to be functioning well and not going into 1 a.m. in the morning with all the daily tasks and then waking up again at 6 and doing it all over again and all over. And it just becomes like a vicious cycle, and you just keep depleting your own human potential and energy. So doing those like little tricks, I would say, you know, to find spaces or little islands in which you know, clean everything off, you know, from the daily tasks, or, you know, from the job and the care that you have to provide for the family, would be the key. And it's, of course, much easier said than done, and I know that. So I don't know if Miloš has some suggestions.
I do, but I would like also to hear from Michelle first.
Okay. Yeah, so I wrote down a couple of notes while you were speaking. And, you know, one of the things that I have found, I've worked at home for many years, pre-COVID. So for me, COVID was a matter of having everyone else around me that I'm working with working from home now as well. And so it wasn't that much of a switch for me. But when I first started, there were certainly some things that I realized I needed to do. And the beauty of it is, when I first started working from home, there was not a worldwide concern going on. And so it was just the stress of learning something new. But some of the things that I have learned, first of all, I recognized about myself when it comes to the motivation thing. There are times of day that I am, different types of responsibilities require a different type of me. For example, I realized that when I'm working on analytical work, I do that best early in the morning. But when I'm working on creative stuff, man, I'm an all-nighter. I mean, the late at night stuff is when the creative stuff flows for me. So now you don't really want to do that all in one day, because then you turn out with this day that starts at 5 in the morning and ends at midnight. So that's not appropriate. But I try to schedule when I know I need to do things. And if I know I have this major creative time, I try to schedule so that I'll be able to, used to be after the kids went to bed and all of that. I raised 5 kids. They are no longer at home anymore. I cannot imagine those of you that are dealing with children in this pandemic. I just can't even fathom that. My youngest is 19, so he's around, but he's not here. So, and my oldest, I have grandkids. So anyway, I just can't, the things that you guys are dealing with is a whole nother level. But recognizing when I work well for different types of tasks was a huge thing for me. And then I'm really big, this is a kid thing, really. I'm really big about a reward system. So when I have something that I have to do that I absolutely hate, I reward myself for it. And I give myself a time block and I say, I'm working on this for 15 minutes and that's it. I am going to do as much as I can do in 15 minutes or 20 or 30. I'm realistic with the thing, but I know I got to get this done. But then I'm going to block an hour for it and I'm going to go take a walk, or I'm going to whatever, fill in the blank. And that is something that has really helped me to be like, okay, it's a game with myself. How quick can I effectively and appropriately get this done? I mean, you don't want to be cutting corners, but figuring out and scheduling that, because then I'm like, okay, you know, my kids always used to laugh at me and say, Mom, you have to schedule everything. And I'm like, no, really, I am very last minute thinker. I love to be spontaneous, as long as you put it in the time block that I've scheduled, because I got too many other people that are depending on me. So, you know, let's be spontaneous, but we have to do it here. And they just never really get that. They're starting to get it now because they're grownups. But so those little rewards, And the other thing that goes with those rewards are breaking that work, especially things you hate, into smaller bite-sized pieces. Okay, I've got this huge database I've got to completely rewrite. I'm going to get through the A's, just the A's. If I can get through the A's and then I can go have some chocolate, whatever, it doesn't matter. You know what's going to help you. Those are the things that then you can, all right, I got through the A's. It wasn't that bad. I can do the B's or whatever. So that's motivation. That's the time of day thing. You did mention when you are away from you finally walk away, which I also don't just have a lunch thing. I have an end of day thing that comes up and tells me end of day. And my electronic vacuum cleaner goes off and then I can't hear anything anyway. And so that tells me it's time to get out of my office. But quite honestly, when I go take a walk, of course, my brain is just the whole first 30 minutes is going all the things that I didn't finish this, I didn't finish that. My phone is a huge, it's a huge help for me because I'm constantly saying, hey Siri, remind me at this time and the time is when I know I'm going to be sitting in front of the computer, knowing I can do something specific for that client. Remind me about this. And the moment that she says, okay, I'll remind you at 9:05 a.m., then I can throw it out of my head and I can get rid of it because I know that tomorrow at 9:05 a.m. or whatever, it's going to remind me. And so I get to let go of it and not think of it anymore. And that's a huge one for me because I used to be one of those people who couldn't go to sleep at night because it was too much. I started doing this kind of thing and I can let it go. And because I know I'm not going to forget it because I have taken care of that item. And so that's a huge thing for me. And I also have a note thing on my phone. If it's longer than that, I just open it up and I talk to it. And sometimes I get goofy words in there, but it's close enough that I can handle it tomorrow or whenever the appropriate time. And that helps me just get it out of my mind, which brings to the new habit. I try to go for a walk every night, a little after when I'm supposed to walk out of my office. And I've talked to my husband about it, and he comes in and says, you said you wanted to go for a walk. We're going to miss sunset if we don't go for a walk right now. And that has helped me. And I'm like, oh, but I'm not done. But that's okay. I have notepads. I write it down so that the first thing I get back to is that very thing. So prioritizing those really important things into the time blocks that you know your mind works, giving yourself that that reward for having accomplished it, and then doing it in small enough blocks that you can accomplish it are things that I have done that have really helped me.
Thanks,
I hope
Michelle.
that wasn't too
Great.
I can add some alternatives. I can see that Michelle, I get you. Like we are very similar anyways. So alternatives, I think that this around the energy and motivation and rewards is very important because not all portions of our job or even the whole of our job is actually giving us energy, it's taking away from it. So knowing what gives you energy and then connecting that in COVID is very important. Is it a walk? Is it playing with kids, chocolate, cooking meals? Whatever it is, you know. So make a conscious decision. I'm going to reconnect with this because I need to fill my batteries, right? I have an alarm that says, literally it says, shut off devices, move away from computer. That's the actual alarm. And then I move off. I also need some amount of time to get my brain out of the work. So my alternative to Michelle is sticky notes. So obviously I'm a Scrum Master, so yes, that helps. So I put those there. Yes, thank you. Yeah, there's also a very interesting way when we talked about meditation. I think that meditation requires a certain practice until you can just switch and do it. But things like maybe yoga nidra practices that you can find YouTube videos on, what's happening? It's happening that it focuses you on your body, on the weight. So it actually draws the energy from your analytical brain down to yourself, and that helps sever the tie between whatever problems you wanted to solve, because our brains are problem-solving machines, really. So you go down to your body, and that can help. So that's why the physical exercises also help, or anything that's more physical, because it kind of gives you like, I'm here, my body is here. It's not in some other space. So what else could be a very good things that we talked about? Habits. So you can create habits that break your pattern of work mode. The interesting ones I heard were you actually simulate commuting to work. You go around the house, around the flat, or you do something, you just move, because something happens when we change space in our brains. So when you change the space by walking, it actually helps you disconnect. Another variation of that is that you try to designate the space in your living space so that it's office only. So when you leave that space, you're out of work. Now, obviously, if you have many rooms in your accommodation, that's easy. If you don't, that's really hard. So it doesn't work really for everyone. And the last one that I remember is actually a CEO taught me this one. And it's really a hack. It's really a hack on your brain because it requires you to actually switch to different parts of your brain very rapidly, because that's, again, breaks the connection between whatever problem you wanted to solve. So you can use a book, and then you just randomly open a page and put a word, and then you make a picture of that. Maybe it's an elephant or something, so you make a picture of that, and then another word, and then you maybe think about that, or you visualize that, or you maybe draw that. So you do as many of those different activities with your brain, or almost random words, and it tends to just break your connection to the problem, and then you can move on. So that was a very effective thing. It sounds very weird, but when you do it for the first time, so maybe you do an experiment and see if it works for you or not.
That sounds like a great practice, and a very, very practical one that everybody can, actually start doing in order to get out of this kind of infinite loop of like job, family, you cannot, get out, especially in lockdown conditions, so.
So let's see, we have a bunch of activity in chat, so that's awesome. So from Milica, we have a quote. So you should sit in meditation for 20 minutes every day. Unless you're too busy, then you should sit for an hour. Absolutely right. Absolutely, if you work with people, many contexts, and in many meetings, it does actually deplete your energy more, especially if you're an introvert. So then this is especially true. So yes, you need to take care of yourself more. So this is a really good one. And we have from Ivana. Ivana, will you share your, and then we can hear from Mladen.
Yeah, I developed this thing during COVID, and I steal time from my daily time, like, because I'm a mother and a wife. And then I wake up very early, like at 5 o'clock. It was really difficult at the beginning to wake up so early. And then I go to the speed walk, and I increased my time in speed walking. I'm almost running for an hour, for 6 kilometers, usually it is. And then I come home and I'm so fresh, and my brain is working rapidly, and I can solve everything and like cook and everything in next 1 hour, and then I start working. So it really helps, because oxygen brings you benefit, of course, for your brain, for thinking, but as well, it levels up your energy and your well-being. As Tom said, I think it's really important. And this is very easy if you're not a person who is actually likes to practice, or to, to do exercises or do running or something similar. This is really, you just go and you walk as quick as you can, to have a pace, sustainable pace,
Yes,
like in
you're Agile Humans, so yes,
Agile Humans.
please. let's use principles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mladen, would you like to also add to the discussion? Maybe unmute.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll even start my video if I manage. Anyway, my line of thought was pretty much similar to Milica's. That's why I said that I liked her thought, and it reminded me of these verses from Khalil Gibran. Unfortunately, I don't know how to spell them in English, so I wrote them in our local languages. And for the majority, I apologize to Michelle and to perhaps some other people who might not know and understand Croatian or Serbian, but I'll read it out loud in Croatian. It tells, ali ako boli svoje rođenje nesrećom nazivate, uzdržavanje tijela prokletstvom koje je na čelu ispisano, onda ja odgovaram da samo znoj s čela vašega može sprati ono što na njemu piše. Which is kind of like, sorry, Miloš, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to actually try to translate it, unless Jasmina wants to jump into this.
Please
no,
do.
She's saying no. Okay, so it says, if the ball of your birth is what you call bad luck, or let's just translate to bad luck, but
Misfortune.
Misfortune, yes, and ascetic or not going into what your body wants, right, is a curse that is written on your forehead. Then my answer is that your sweat is the thing that can erase that from your forehead. Yeah. Not as well put as in Serbian, but yeah,
it doesn't sound so poetic, but the meaning is, I hope, understandable. I always found it useful in situations in which, okay, I might somehow frame what's going on in the context and give to people some indirect suggestion that they obviously need to raise up their level of physical activity. Because if we, continue circling within the same boundaries, very same boundaries between our desk and the same room and the same computer and the same type of tasks, even mindfulness is pretty much the same activity, mindful. So I thought that this might be nice advice somehow to people to change the type of activity they're engaged into.
Absolutely.
I love the balance between the body and the spirit and the mind, right? So it should be in balance. And I can remember my yoga instructor saying, like, you're focused too much on your mind. You need to focus more on your body. It needs to be in balance. So I see that. I also see something as a coach that I really liked in this quotation. It's you have the power to take this into your control. And something that Tom also mentioned, that we may not control the circumstances, but how we react, we can. Obviously, some people have higher level of that control. It does require some working on yourself. You can get a personal coach or a mentor to help you with that. And it is something that forms resilience and well-being over time. But this sensation that you are the sailor, you are the one that's at, if your life is a ship, you're the one that's navigating it. It may not go as fast as you want, but you're the one that it's actually in control. And maybe we can, I remember also, I think this was from Dalai Lama, it says, if you are a boat on a lake, you can let life and the lake just swing you around, or you can, grab and move where you want it to move. And this sensation that, feel yourself with energy, as we talked here. So how do we overcome halt and to get enough energy in our sails to actually move where we want, because we do have the ability to do that. And it's also a skill, something that can be developed. It's not like you were born with it or not, or maybe in British you are, because if you speak English, then obviously it's not that good. But I think that's a really powerful message that it is, and people have done it. I think that's something that you should always keep in mind. It's something that helped me from the book that I talked about, is that whatever you're experiencing, you're deeply human. Somebody else experienced that too, and they overcome it, and just a natural thing in life, and you can do it too.
This is exactly the impression I got, from our meetup here. Actually, however isolated we may feel, when you guys share your stories, I realize that actually this is everything that I have been through, that I've been thinking about, that, we actually share one common human experience. But as you said, and what the Dalai Lama said, and most of the Buddhists say, it's our intentionality, like that we do have intention, and the right intention, which of course is always something that should be focused on the sense of service and help, for others. And if we do that, and that's one of the actually other predictors of resilience, doing stuff for others is something that gives an immense sense of human worth to our efforts, and we then stop feeling senselessness even in the midst of this type of crisis. So this is also something that is always very important to realize. We would not be here without others, so therefore we have to kind of carry that on. And it's easy to lose that perspective if we are always in this kind of corporate rat race where everybody is for themselves and trying to advance and be better, earn more, and so on. So this is something that we probably have to modify just like a little bit, step by step, a little step by little step.
Okay, wonderful discussion. I can say, like, for sure, this was maybe the most discussion we had, at least as I was moderating. So thank you a lot for everyone to just jump in and share your experience, because as a collective we can do more. And since I don't see any more questions, so I'll throw another one and let's see where it leads us. We have some maybe 15 minutes more and then we can wrap up. I'm very curious around, as the research found that you suggested they were from Britain, and I was in a sort of a support group that was mainly consisting of people from US. I was also working kind of like in Irish Serbian and then in US Serbian companies and working with them. So I've experienced like very cultural nuances around resilience and well-being and openness to some of the practices within these, or even access to it. And so, for instance, some of the things that I observed is that general people in the Balkans are more resilient, since we had more wartime experience. So when we compare it to that, COVID is not such a big crisis, but the US folks don't really have that. And that was very, very clear to me in this like mostly US-based support group. I can also see that, and they're also, for instance, comparing it to World War I, but their casualties were actually much lower than the casualties of European countries. So even in that comparison, it doesn't really work, right? I've seen that in general, I would say US has more access to coaches, psychological support and stuff like that. That in the Balkans, it's still taboo to go to a psychiatrist, to a psychotherapist, to a coach. We also have life coaches that didn't really help us in promoting some of these things, unfortunately. And I wanted also to maybe hear some of your take, because obviously you're from the Balkans. Now you're in Croatia. You have been working a lot in US, and the research is from Britain. What are your experiences and maybe like different how people are coping? And I remember when I talked with the Irish people, the Irish people said, oh no, how we cope with anxiety is we ignore it and go for a beer. And then how the Serbs cope with anxiety, we attack it with everything and we are very critical and very direct. So it's like in for Serbs, a lot of times you look like a wreck actually helps, and then they just say everything. But I learned that with US folks, no, don't do that. Be very, very, very careful. So I was also wondering, what are your different experiences of how to approach? Because even if you're talking about Serbs, not every Serb is the same, of course. There are some cultural similarities, and I think that people can draw from those too. So let's hear maybe in US and Britain, how do people cope?
Well, I mean, you pretty much said it all. You summed it up really well. So it's like, it doesn't leave me much, to say, but it is because of those kind of like maybe epigenetic kind of experiences of every 50 years of wars that people in this particular Balkan region, not just the Serbs, but I would say the Croats and everybody else, is also kind of almost expecting bad things and trauma to kind of happen, that it's always kind of lurking around the corner. When we speak about the United States, we also always speak about like a certain segment, which is kind of white middle class ideology that's kind of projected, and that's usually the people we meet. But those people who are in the kind of Black communities, Latino communities, in the minority communities have to develop like a lot of resilient practices in order to survive. And so, fortunately, those who succeed, they are also used to a lot of stress and trauma, being always on the downside of the society and culture, always being hunted down by the police and so on and so forth. So I had organized a program that was called Dostoevsky Behind Bars when I was in the Slavic department, where we actually went and our graduate students practiced teaching Russian and Slavic literature to inmates at a medium facility prison in Wisconsin. And it was very interesting how meeting those inmates, people behind bars, and listening and hearing to their stories and what they had to go through in their lives was pretty much closer to the Balkans, type of experience than would be from my middle class students. So, of course, United States is a country of 330 million. So we cannot really generalize, neither can we, about this. Each person really is, in a sense, an island, but there are definitely cultural factors that contribute to this kind of well-being and resilience. In our culture, when somebody asks you, how are you doing, you don't want to say you're doing well because you will jinx it. So you basically want to say, oh yeah, I'm kind of okay, I'm not really doing that well, because you don't want the devil to hear it, so that it will really make your life bad. So for example, so we have like a different relationship to this kind of question of well-being. Even if you're feeling well, we don't want to share it with others, and we don't want to let them know, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like interestingly culturally enwrapped question. While in the US, in the middle class culture, it's all about like the what the dead Kennedys used to call in the punk era the dictatorship of the smile. It's like you have to smile all the time. And I remember when I was a graduate student and I went to visit some people at Berkeley, and I was like, just got up and I was in a bad mood, and I went down the street like with this, kind of frowning face, and the guy like stopped me and said, smile, you're in California. So for example, that's like one good example. You're not supposed to feel bad, you're not supposed to have bad emotions, and so on and so forth. So it's like very culturally like biased, let's say.
And Michelle, where are you from? Are you States?
Yes, I'm in the United States. And, it's interesting because you were talking about how different cultures are responding or coping with things. And what I would say, one of the things that I used to live in Germany for a little while, and one of the things people would say is America a wet country or a dry country? And I'd be like, Yes, because that just didn't make sense to me what that question was. But we're such a large physical body of land that it encompasses all of the above. We have deserts and we have, high mountaintops with snow and all of that. I'm originally from the Northwest. I grew up in a very hardy lifestyle. I had to work very hard physically work hard to do things, which there's a lot of cultures that's totally the norm. You got to work hard. That's life. I lived on a great big ranch, all of that. That is not always typical for Americans. And so the coping thing, the way Americans have coped with this whole thing is they get on social media and they complain and they argue and they everything else. And it's horrible. It is horrible. And I'm curious if that is similar to the rest of the world, or if it is just something that we have taken the cake on. But it is terrible. Neighbors and friends and everything have come down on every side. You would think there's two sides to a story. No, there's 102 sides to every story. And everybody is going to be angry at somebody about something else. And so, you mentioned it, Tom, at one point in the beginning, turn off the stupid news, because it just does. It gets angsty and stuff. And one of the things that on Facebook that I love is the snooze for 30 days. I can't tell you how many people I have snoozed for 30 days and then 30 more. And I don't want to unfriend them, because they're actually people that I know, and they're actually people that, I'd like to interact with, but I don't want to listen to the junk, and it's not that I don't want to hear their opinion. I love hearing other people's opinions. I literally go to certain people's pages that I know have total opposite opinions of me, because I want to learn. I want to hear other thoughts, but I want to hear thoughts and considerations and good discussions. That's what I love. I don't want to hear arguing and name calling and garbage like that. And so there's definitely been a lot of that, but I fit into that exact thing, that white middle class thing that you were talking about, and I definitely do. And there are people here that are suffering deeply. There is no question about that. But there's a lot of people who aren't suffering deeply, but they complain like they are. And that's really, discouraging at times. But there's a lot of people who aren't suffering, who are totally taking up for the people that are. And I am grateful that there is that as well. So I think in every culture, there's probably a little bit of everything, and every kind of person. But, I just try to, I have teams that I lead, and I try to make sure that, we do things like this, where we're just like, we've got one next Wednesday. We call it a happy hour, where we just get on and zero work. It's about, tell me about what's going on with you. How are you handling this? How are things going? And I ask the questions, and sometimes we'll be having this conversation, and I'll be having the side one-to-one conversation saying, okay, tell me what you really meant. Are you okay? And that kind of thing. So I'm kind of known for getting in people's face in a really fun way that they don't mind and they like. So
Excellent.
Thank you for sharing that. And then Ivana, can I hop you in, since you're in Germany? Let's hear that part also. Let's connect as much as viewpoints as we can.
The first my clash with this society here, if I can say it, was that I'm naturally a smiling person, and I was smiling all the time on the street. I'm smiling all the time. So the first thing that happened to me in Germany, in Berlin, was that everyone was addressing me with hello, like in German, like, oh, hello, good afternoon, or something like, oh, do I know you? I don't know you. And just because of the smile. It's not it's absolutely not typical for them. But the thing is that they are very rigid people and cold, and it is really difficult for a coach to get through those barriers and membranes. So You're totally right, but we succeeded. We organize. I wrote it right now. We organize once a week a drinking evening, as if we were in the office. So, and then we joke about everything. Of course, we don't talk about work, and we just joke about each other's things. So, what are you hiding in your wardrobe? Is it a person? Did you did you kill a postman? And so on. So it's just joking, and it's nice. I always feel refreshed. I'm a social person. I really like that. So it's a good medicine.
And thank you for sharing that now. I remember one person said, I'm very grateful that I had a tiny little window into the life of my colleagues through Zoom or Teams. Because we see kind of like pieces, and like after 3 or 4 months, people just stop bothering like to hide stuff, and so you could see like loved ones like kiss before they go even there. So a colleague of mine, so actually an ex-client, so you can see the door behind me, so the one is more narrow. So she actually told me, like, I was wondering for 6 months, is that an optical illusion or is that an actually more narrow door? And in a strange way, we also found out new ways of connecting. So what Tom was talking about, we are social beings. We really have that need. Some of us more, some of us less. So I also remember extroverts saying, like, remember us extroverts, we need people, please. And you know, the introverts are like, oh yes, this is what I wanted. I don't have to go anywhere, right? And I think some of those practices, I also heard people just having lunch breaks. So you just kind of turn the Zoom on and you just have lunch, and you see other people from your office having lunch, or maybe you go in a Zoom breakout room and then you chat with them over lunch. So some of those things can be simulated. Some of the things, one of the more fun things that I saw was a scavenger game on Zoom, which is basically go get something pink and fluffy. So you just give something like that, and people have 2 minutes to go and find some of those things. So I think there's very creative ways how we can create, as Tom said, habits, how we can create, reconnect and get energy, or how can we get like physical movement in body. You know, groups like these, just tons of ideas, I would say. I thought I kind of like, I almost heard all of those because I was in so many support groups and everybody shared, but no, like there's always something new because people are so creative. So thanks everyone for sharing those.
I have a really quick one to share with you. One that I did, it was for one of my teams for a retro. I had everyone send me 4 pictures in a pick stick, so that there was, 4 images that could be non-identifying, but things that described them in some way, shape, or form. A kayak, hiking boots, whatever. And then I put them all on a page, and then I shared the page, and we had to try to guess who was who. And I had 2 winners. The winners were whoever guessed the most correctly, and the person who nobody guessed, who had the least guesses, that did the best job picking the pictures. And then what I did is it was 2 events. The first one was part of the retro, and okay, that was fun, and you got to see whose was what. But then at our next happy hour, we then talked about the pictures and shared. Oh yeah, I love to backpack. I'm planning to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in a few years, And it was really cool because you got to see the non-work side of people, things that people didn't know, and in these great images. And people still talk about that, and they just loved it. And so I just thought I would throw that. And there was one other teeny weeny thing. We actually have a chat room in our work stuff in the midst of all of it that we call it geekage, but it's kind of like a water cooler. And we're talking about the launch, the SpaceX launch, and we're talking about the whatever. And it's where we talk about anything and everything, nothing. I mean, it's up to anything. as long as it's not work. And so it gives you that place to be able to just interact with about completely random things, and it's great. And
Absolutely.
it's this without the videos and without the solid meeting and all of that. So it's fun.
Great, great for, and I would say like we had an awesome discussion, and we are almost out of time. So I would like to give the final wrap up word to Tom and see what would he like to share with us.
Well, I would like, first of all, to thank you for this opportunity. I think I enjoyed this immensely, you know, probably much more than you guys did. But, just like try to keep sane, try to, keep on going, every change that you want to make in your life, even if it's a journey of 30,000 miles, requires the first step. So whenever you feel trapped, just like make that first step in the positive direction, and, if, try to help others, and they will help you, and try to keep that social bond, together, because, these kind of pandemic situations are there and they're tearing at the social bonds, but we need to keep them. And this examples that Michelle gave and that you guys gave, in which you have just like a free time and you're generous to each other, they contribute immensely to, keeping that social bond alive.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful, wonderful thing. And thanks everyone for sharing all your coping mechanisms and tricks and hacks. And I hope that everybody found something for themselves that they can use. Hopefully not one thing, but many that you can experiment with. I once again remind you that this is being recorded, so look for the Agile Humans Meetup page, and the video should be available. And that's it for today.
Thank you.